Hey folks, haven't done that in a while. Oh my. Germany is one of the most powerful economies in the world. Time and time again, Germany seems to serve as a world leader and the glue holding together the European Union. Now, I imagine when I mention I'm doing a history of Germany, you're thinking of that time. Deutschland, Deutschland, viva! But you're in luck. This video is part one of a series, and here we'll be talking about ancient Germanic tribes, Charlemagne, and the Holy Roman Empire. This is Germany before Germany? Hi, I'm Tristan, and this is Step Back. Subscribe and hit the bell notification to get history every week. So to get started, we really have to go back to a long time ago, like hundreds of thousands of years ago. The earliest sign that there were humans in Germany actually goes to a 1907 discovery that shows that there were at least human or human-like creatures living in Germany about 600,000 years ago. And then about half that time ago, about 300,000 years ago, there were some of the oldest weapons ever found on Earth also found in Germany. There's a lot of evidence that non-human hominids lived in Germany, such as the Neanderthals. This is all about maybe 40,000 years ago. You may also remember that some of the oldest pieces of human art, like the Venus of Willendorf, are actually from Germany. They're some of the oldest things ever. They're like these statues of these very curvy, busty women that were thought to be used as either some sort of primitive form of stone pornography or as like fertility statues. People are still trying to figure this one out. So this is like a scale of hundreds of thousands of years. It's like a scant, comprehensible amount of time. These people, however, were not the ancestors of the first Germans. Actually, the first German people are suspected to have come from Scandinavia, probably about 2,500 years ago. Over the next 500 years, the people who came from Scandinavia settled in the region that would become Germany and sort of took it over. We don't actually know that much about Germans in this period, except that they were groups of tribes that fought regularly against the Romans in the south. So a lot of our evidence about what life was like for the Germans comes a lot from the writings of their sworn enemies, which is always a red light in history books. Romans were fighting and conquering German tribes throughout the 1st century CE, so right around the time when the CE and BCE are meeting each other. And what this did is it caused a cultural blending to occur between German culture coming from Scandinavia and Roman culture coming up from the south. So that being said, a lot of Germany remained firmly outside of Roman territory. A lot of the German tribes that weren't flat out conquered and kind of turned into these more urban, more organized centers started to organize around the frontiers of Roman territory because there was a lot of value to be made either trading with the Romanized Germans or by raiding into Roman territory and sacking it and taking things and going back to their homes. And one of the things about Germany that's important for understanding it today is that the Romans, when they took parts of Germany, they split it up into these administrative regions that are actually a lot of the regions of modern-day Germany and Austria. As we all know, though, the Roman Empire had an expiry date, and it began to crack and crumble. And you probably heard many, many times that barbarians sacked Rome. Well, most often they're referring to the Germans when they're referring to the, quote, barbarians. So as the Roman Empire began to crumble at the fringes, German tribes began to move into those areas. Around the same time, there was also a spread of Christianity into Germany. So a religion that's actually not dissimilar from the pagan Norse religion to a new religion, Christianity, Catholicism, essentially. Another thing that occurred in this time period was the Huns. They were a Central Asian group of nomads led by a general, you probably know him as Attila the Hun, moved into what is modern-day Germany and also settled and ruled over Germany for several centuries. You probably have heard of the Huns, and you might have also heard that during World War I, the Germans were referred to as the Huns, sort of bringing this conqueror mythology along with it. That being said, by the 5th century, the influence of the Huns started to wane, and the German tribes that had been Romanized, that had been Hunned, had been living in the shadow of this crumbling Roman Empire, started to settle into early duchies and started to migrate into more Roman territory as it fell away. Now, the period after this is typically called the Dark Ages, but it's far from descriptive. It's not a time when there was massive declines. There was actually a lot going on in Germany. Germany was organizing and starting to coalesce into larger units. So in this period, the tribes in Germany fought with each other, lived with each other, made deals, and traded until they were conquered by an empire from France called the Franks, which was a sort of tribal confederacy, which is when several tribes band together as tributaries to a single powerful tribe. Think of it like the Aztec Empire. The Aztecs had a lot of neighboring city-states that acted as tributaries towards Tenochtitlan, which was the center of the Aztecs themselves. And this was pretty similar to how it worked in Germany. The Germans became a tributary force towards the Frankish rulers in France. And because of this loose affiliation, there was not a ton of work that needed to be done in order to maintain and hold the empire together. And at this time, the region was much more sparsely populated than it is today, so the Frankish Empire actually got really, really big. And during that time, there was also all sorts of various invasions that expanded the rulership of the Frankish Empire into more and more of Germany over what we'd be calling the Dark Ages. The most important one we have to point out, though, is that in the year 751, a leader of the Franks called Pippin III took the title of king, which comes from the Christian Roman tradition. And so as king, he finally became the first of the Frankish leaders to become the representative of the church in Rome. A descendant of his is probably the more famous one that you remember, who was in Germany called Charles the Great, but you might know him more as Charlemagne. And under the rulership of Charlemagne, the Frankish Empire grew into an even larger power in Europe. It conquered large parts of modern Germany and even invaded down into what it was called Lombardy, but is basically today northern Italy. And after his death, we have what historians call the Carolingian Empire. And on Christmas of 800 CE, the Pope actually crowned Charlemagne the Emperor of Rome, which sparked the birth of a state that would exist in one form or another all the way until the 19th century when Napoleon would crumble it. Let's talk a little bit about that state. So Charlemagne's long-reaching borders would only last for a few generations. By the time the rulers were Charlemagne's grandkids, the empire had been split into 3 different countries. One would roughly be France, one would roughly be northern Italy, and one would be modern-day Germany. You probably know these as West Francia, East Francia, and Lombardy. And the first leader to break off into a German state would be the leader named King Henry the Fowler. But what's more important is his son, Otto I, who was crowned by the Pope the title of Holy Roman Emperor, which is a title that would be held in Germany for nearly 1,000 years. And he had a lot of power in the Roman Church. He solidified it under his own rule. Even for a while, the Holy Roman Emperor had a lot of influence over who would be elected Pope. And then around the 11th century, Europe began to get involved in the Crusades, which was a large campaign to invade Muslim territory in the Middle East. And the Holy Roman Empire played more than its part in that invasion. There are several famous Crusader Knight orders that come from the Holy Roman Empire, like the Teutonic Knights, for example. And they were also part of a Holy Roman Empire expansion east, which started to displace and move Slavic peoples out of regions that would be modern-day Eastern Germany. There was also an interesting group called the Hanseatic League, which was a series of powerful trading cities in northern Germany that more or less controlled a lot of the trade in the Baltic Sea. And the Holy Roman Empire was not exactly a unified, cohesive unit. The Holy Roman Empire always suffered from civil wars and at once even went to war with the papacy. Over this series of internal strifes and conflicts, the central core, the power of the Holy Roman Emperor himself, began to decline, and more power began to go to regional princes and powerful clergy members. By the end of this period, the emperor was an elected position, which was chosen from a body of powerful leaders called electors, which was a high honor in the nobility of the Holy Roman Empire. Only a handful would be able to choose who would become emperor. Some Holy Roman emperors would try to centralize this, but it never really worked out in the long term. And then things started to change when the 14th century rolled around and the Black Death ravaged Europe. It's a massive pandemic that wiped out between a third and some estimates say over half of the European population. Germany, of course, was no exception. Some say it was even one of the hardest hit countries by the Black Death. And because of it, there was a series of wars and major religious upheavals that happened all across Europe. At one point, there was even a time where 5 people claimed at the same time that they were all pope. And in this chaos in the Holy Roman Empire, one family based out of modern-day Austria in the southeast, called the Habsburgs, would start to become more prominent in the eternal politics of the Holy Roman Empire, and eventually would become emperor, and with only a few years of exception, were pretty much the rulers of the Holy Roman Empire all the way until it collapsed. So from this point onwards, Austria was going to be the seat of imperial authority in Germany. Now, as we get to the Renaissance, the early modern period, in the 16th century, the Holy Roman Empire would go through another major upheaval. Martin Luther, the founder of the Protestant Church, was from Germany, and all of the stuff in the Protestant Reformation happened primarily in Germany. The church was split into what would be called the Protestant Reformation, which was a bloody fight between Catholics and Protestants that would fight for over 100 years, and Germany was smack in the middle of it, almost evenly split between Catholic princes and Protestant princes. Germany was in a state of civil war, probably mounting in the biggest of these conflicts, which was called the 30 Years' War, where approximately 40% of Germans died. Now, in this chaos, just like when the Austrians came to preeminence in the previous period of chaos, there was a new group, sort of in that region where the Slavics were displaced, a new kingdom that was highly authoritarian, centralized, and militaristic, called the Prussians, began to become more and more prominent. So after the 30 Years' War, they became another major power and would be the seed of what would later become the German Empire, which is something that's going to be talked about with Emperor Tigerstar. Also in this period, the Holy Roman Empire got into a ton of other conflicts. They fought the Turks, they fought the French. One time they even invaded Poland for some reason. But their time was limited. In the late 18th century, the French had a massive liberal revolution. You might know it as the French Revolution. And out of that revolution came a powerful new centralized leader in Paris named Napoleon Bonaparte. You might have heard of him. And the French used the revolutionary zeal to invade countries to liberate and modernize them. And Germany was no exception. Large parts of the Holy Roman Empire fell to Napoleon, and in them he set up these puppet kingdoms that banded together under a rough coalition called the Coalition of the Rhine. These countries would abandon feudalism and had major new liberal reforms imposed upon them. The remaining parts of the Holy Roman Empire were part of the major coalition of powers that was designed to stop France's expansion. Maybe because conquering their land and beheading their princess isn't exactly the best way to make friends with the Holy Roman Empire. And it was in 1806 when Napoleon had conquered enough of Germany that he declared the Holy Roman Empire to be dead, discarding it as an anachronism of a previous age. Prussia, the nascent empire in the making, actually tried to stay out of the war, and they managed to do so until the 1812 attempted invasion of Russia that Napoleon tried to do, and many will agree was one of the most epic disasters in military history. It was so bad that those puppet German kingdoms that he set up under the coalition of the Rhine actually turned on Napoleon, and by the time the Napoleonic era was over, by the time that Napoleon was sitting on an island in the South Atlantic, by the time he was dead, there was basically no Holy Roman Empire left. All centralized organization was gone. However, there were powerful players. There was Austria. There was Prussia. And the treaty that came after the Napoleonic period, Prussia gained a lot of territory and became one of the most powerful countries in Europe. It was poised to run over and take over all of these small German kingdoms. And this is where Emperor Tigerstar will pick up the story in part 2. After his video, you can go to the Alternate History Hub for the history of modern Germany, including, yes, the World Wars. Trust me, this is but the fastest of overviews. German history is huge, and because it's European history, there's like 100 times more books written about it than other places. So if I missed your favorite war or didn't talk about the importance of your small region of choice, I'm sorry, I tried. Still, read on. There's way more than what I said in this story. I also want to thank 12 Tone for the theme song, as well as patrons Don and Carrie Johnson, Colby Monty, Scott Smith, Martin King, and Michael Kirshner. Come back next time for more Step Back.